Vandals of Civilization: Why Climate Activists Attack Our Cultural Heritage. Introduction. The intersection of climate activism and cultural heritage has become a focal point of heated debate in recent years. As the urgency of climate change has escalated, some activists have resorted to extreme measures including vandalism to draw attention to their cause. This report delves into the motivations, implications, and public responses surrounding these controversial actions, framing them within the broader context of climate activism. Overview of the controversy. In an era where the consequences of climate change are increasingly visible, a segment of climate activists has taken to targeting cultural heritage sites and artifacts. These acts of vandalism are often characterized by the defacement of art, historical monuments, and other culturally significant materials. Activists argue that such actions are necessary to provoke public discourse and highlight the inaction of governments and institutions in addressing the climate crisis. Motivation for actions. The rationale behind these radical actions stems from a sense of frustration among activists. Traditional forms of protest, such as marches, petitions, and educational campaigns, are perceived as having limited impact. In their view, more shocking tactics are essential to jolt the public and policymakers out of complacency regarding climate change. Activists believe that by attacking cultural symbols they can convey the urgent message that climate change poses a direct threat not only to the environment but also to the very fabric of civilization itself. Cultural heritage as a target. Cultural heritage sites are seen as reflections of human achievement and identity. By targeting these sites, activists aim to underscore their vulnerability in the face of climate change. They argue that if we fail to protect our environment, we risk losing not only our natural world but also our cultural identity. The destruction of cultural heritage serves as a metaphor for the broader destruction wrought by climate change, illustrating the stakes involved in the fight for environmental preservation. Public response. The public reaction to these tactics has been deeply polarized. On one side, some individuals view the actions as justified, arguing that the climate crisis demands urgent and radical measures. Supporters contend that such actions serve to elevate the conversation around climate change, forcing it into mainstream discourse. Conversely, critics argue that vandalism of cultural heritage undermines the legitimacy of the climate movement. They assert that such actions can alienate potential allies and distract from the core message of environmental urgency. This division reflects a broader tension within social movements regarding the effectiveness of disruptive tactics. Historical context. The targeting of cultural heritage by climate activists can be contextualized within a larger history of protest movements. Throughout history, activists have employed disruptive tactics to raise awareness for various social, political, and environmental issues. However, the specific targeting of cultural heritage is a relatively new phenomenon that raises ethical questions about the means employed to achieve social change. The history of protest movements highlights the complexity of balancing urgency with respect for cultural values. Differences between perspectives. While many activists assert that extreme measures are justified given the dire circumstances of climate change, critics challenge this perspective. They argue that the moral implications of vandalism must be carefully considered. Actions that damage cultural heritage can overshadow the fundamental issues of climate change that activists aim to highlight. Furthermore, the debate surrounding vandalism can detract from the broader conversation about effective solutions to the climate crisis, making it essential to navigate the ethical landscape of activism thoughtfully. Timeline of events. Emergence of climate activism. Climate activism began gaining momentum in the late 20th century, primarily focused on raising awareness through education and peaceful protest. Key movements such as Earth Day and the formation of organizations like Greenpeace laid the groundwork for contemporary climate advocacy. Shift in tactics. In the 2020s, a notable shift occurred as some activists began adopting more extreme measures. High-profile incidents of vandalism such as defacing famous artworks or historical monuments captured media attention and sparked widespread debate. Growing backlash. Following these incidents, public and institutional backlash increased. Debates erupted over the appropriateness and effectiveness of such tactics, with discussions surrounding the potential alienation of supporters and the moral implications of targeting cultural heritage. Conclusion: the discourse surrounding climate activists targeting cultural heritage reflects a complex interplay of urgency, ethics, and the effectiveness of protest. While these actions aim to spark critical conversations about climate change, they also provoke significant debate regarding respect for cultural heritage and the moral implications of using such tactics. As climate activism continues to evolve, the ongoing dialogue about the strategies employed will likely shape the future direction of the movement. Balancing the imperative for urgent action with respect for cultural values presents a significant challenge for activists as they navigate the complex landscape of climate advocacy. The topic Vandals of Civilization: Why Climate Activists Attack Our Cultural Heritage presents a nuanced and controversial intersection between climate activism and the preservation of cultural heritage. Here are some counterintuitive insights that can be discerned from the discussions surrounding this issue. 1. Vandalism as a form of preservation advocacy. While vandalism is typically viewed as destructive, some activists frame their actions as a form of preservation advocacy. They argue that by drawing attention to the existential threat posed by climate change, they are ultimately fighting to preserve not just the environment but the cultural heritage that is intertwined with it. This perspective contends that without addressing climate change, both natural and cultural heritages are at risk, suggesting a paradox where destruction is seen as a means to protect. 2. Public sympathy and alienation. Surprisingly, while many believe that vandalism will alienate the public and diminish support for climate action, there are instances where such actions have garnered sympathy from segments of the population. Some individuals resonate with the desperation that drives activists to take extreme measures, viewing it as a reflection of the urgency of the climate crisis. This suggests that emotional responses to climate activism can be complex and varied, potentially leading to increased support for the cause in some demographics. 3. Historical precedent of protest. The current wave of climate vandalism is often criticized as unprecedented. However, this overlooks a historical pattern where cultural and artistic disruptions have been employed in various social movements, from the suffragettes to civil rights activists. History shows that disruptive tactics have sometimes been effective in raising awareness and prompting societal change. This historical context contradicts the assumption that vandalism is inherently ineffective or damaging to the broader movement. 4. Misalignment with public values. Another counterintuitive aspect is the potential misalignment between the values of activists and the broader public. While activists may believe they are acting in the public interest by drawing attention to climate issues, the public may prioritize the preservation of cultural heritage over the urgency of climate messages. This disconnect can lead to backlash against the activists, even as they see themselves as champions of a greater cause. 5. Cultural heritage as a symbol of climate impact. Activists argue that targeting cultural heritage is not merely an act of vandalism but a poignant reminder of what is at stake due to climate change. This reframing suggests that cultural artifacts represent not just history but the very identity of communities, making their preservation crucial to understanding the full scope of climate impacts. This viewpoint challenges the traditional notion that cultural heritage should remain untouched, positing instead that it can serve as a powerful symbol in the climate narrative. 6. The role of media in shaping perception. The media plays a crucial role in shaping public perception of both climate activism and cultural vandalism. While some incidents of vandalism receive widespread condemnation, others may be reframed as acts of righteous defiance against an oppressive system. This can lead to polarized views where some see the activists as heroes while others vilify them. The media's focus on the sensational aspects of these actions can inadvertently amplify the activists' message, creating a paradox where negative attention can still yield positive outcomes in terms of visibility for climate issues. 7. Ethical dilemmas in activism. The ethical implications of targeting cultural heritage sites bring forth a counterintuitive dilemma. The very act of vandalism raises questions about the moral foundations of activism. While activists justify their methods as necessary for the greater good, critics argue that such actions undermine the ethical standing of the climate movement. This paradox highlights the tension between means and ends in activism, whether the urgency of the situation justifies the methods employed, even at the cost of alienating potential allies. 8. Potential for dialogue. Lastly, the actions of climate activists, despite being controversial, can open up channels for dialogue about the intersection of climate change and cultural heritage. This counterintuitive outcome suggests that rather than merely creating division, these acts can prompt conversations about the value of cultural heritage in the context of environmental crises, fostering a deeper understanding of both issues. In summary, the actions of climate activists targeting cultural heritage reveal a complex web of motivations, public perceptions, and ethical considerations that challenge conventional views on protest and preservation. The counterintuitive insights highlight the intricate relationship between urgency in climate activism and the respect for cultural legacy, suggesting that the discourse surrounding these actions is multifaceted and ripe for continued exploration. The topic Vandals of Civilization, Why Climate Activists Attack Our Cultural Heritage, raises critical issues surrounding the intersection of climate activism and cultural preservation. Here we will highlight significant aspects of the discussion that are often overlooked, shedding light on their implications. 1. The ethical dilemma of means versus ends. One of the most significant yet frequently overlooked discussions in this context is the ethical implications of employing vandalism as a means of protest. While many activists argue that the urgency of the climate crisis justifies extreme measures, this perspective raises questions about the moral standing of the movement itself. The ethical dilemma centers on whether it is justifiable to harm cultural heritage, representations of collective human achievement and history, in pursuit of a greater good. This debate is significant because it can redefine the boundaries of acceptable protest and activism. It challenges activists to consider the potential ramifications of their actions on public perception and future support for climate initiatives. 2. Cultural heritage as a symbol of civilization. Activists' choice to target cultural heritage sites is particularly revealing. It reflects a deeper narrative about the fragility of civilization in the face of climate change. By attacking symbols of our cultural identity, activists aim to underscore the message that environmental degradation threatens not just nature but also the very foundations of human history and culture. This dual threat is often overlooked in broader climate discussions, which tend to prioritize environmental concerns over cultural ones. Recognizing this connection is crucial as it broadens the narrative around climate action, framing it as a holistic issue that encompasses cultural preservation. 3. Public perception and division. The divided public reaction to these actions is another critical aspect that deserves more attention. While some people may support the activists' motivations, others view their methods as counterproductive. This division can have lasting effects on the climate movement. The risk is that such extreme actions may alienate potential allies who could be instrumental in driving policy changes and public awareness. Understanding the nuances of public perception is essential for activists as they navigate strategies to advocate for climate action. It suggests that successful climate advocacy may require a balance between urgency and respect for cultural values. 4. Historical context of protest movements. The historical context of protest tactics is an often overlooked element that can provide insights into current activism. Throughout history, various movements have resorted to disruptive strategies to gain attention and push for change. However, targeting cultural heritage is a relatively new phenomenon that raises unique questions. This historical lens allows us to examine how protest tactics evolve and how they are received by society. It encourages a discussion about the effectiveness of different forms of protest and the potential for backlash. By understanding this evolution, activists can better strategize their approaches to ensure their message resonates without causing irreparable harm to their cause. 5. Media influence and saturation. The role of media in shaping the narrative around these protests is another critical aspect often overlooked. In an age where sensationalism often drives news cycles, the visibility of vandalism can eclipse the underlying message of climate urgency. This phenomenon can lead to a focus on the act of vandalism itself rather than the important discussions about climate change that activists are trying to initiate. Understanding the media landscape is vital for activists as they consider how best to communicate their messages in a way that captures public attention without being overshadowed by the controversy of their methods. 6. The risk of desensitization. Another significant concern is the risk of desensitization to climate issues due to the normalization of extreme protest tactics. If acts of vandalism become commonplace, there is a possibility that the public may become numb to their significance, reducing the urgency of the climate message. This desensitization can dilute the impact of the actions taken and may even lead to a backlash against the climate movement as a whole. Acknowledging this risk is essential for activists to maintain the potency of their efforts and ensure that their message remains impactful. Conclusion. The actions of climate activists targeting cultural heritage sites provoke a complex discussion that intersects ethics, public perception, historical context, and media influence. Recognizing the significance of these often overlooked aspects can enhance our understanding of the climate movement and its challenges. As the dialogue continues, it is crucial for activists and advocates to navigate these complexities thoughtfully, ensuring that their strategies effectively promote climate action while respecting the cultural legacies that define human civilization. The interplay between urgency and respect for heritage will shape the future landscape of climate activism and its societal acceptance. 1. Motivation for actions. The primary motivation behind climate activists' vandalism of cultural heritage sites is rooted in frustration with conventional protest methods. Activists argue that peaceful demonstrations, while noble, have not led to meaningful policy changes regarding climate action. Therefore, they resort to extreme measures, believing that shocking the public and policymakers is necessary to provoke urgent discourse on the climate crisis. This point warrants in-depth analysis of the effectiveness and ethics of using vandalism as a means of protest, examining whether such actions can genuinely contribute to societal change or simply alienate potential allies. 2. Cultural heritage as a target. The choice to target cultural heritage sites underscores a poignant message regarding the interconnectedness of environmental sustainability and cultural identity. Activists believe that the destruction of nature and cultural heritage go hand in hand. If we fail to address climate change, we risk losing not only our environmental resources but also our cultural history and identity. This point opens avenues for discussion on the symbolic value of cultural heritage and how its preservation is intrinsically linked to environmental stewardship. An analysis could explore how such actions might be perceived as a desperate plea to highlight the consequences of climate inaction. 3. Public response. The public reaction to these vandalistic actions has been polarized. While some view them as necessary steps in a climate emergency, others consider them counterproductive and disrespectful to cultural history. This division raises important questions about the role of public perception in activism. A nuanced discussion could delve into the implications of public sentiment on the effectiveness of climate activism strategies, examining how extremist tactics influence broader climate conversations and the potential for backlash from the general populace. This analysis could also consider how cultural heritage advocates respond to these actions and the implications for future collaborations between environmental and cultural preservation movements. 4. Historical context. Understanding the historical context of this phenomenon is crucial in framing the current discourse. The tactics employed by some climate activists can be seen as part of a larger tradition of civil disobedience and disruptive protest movements. However, the specific targeting of cultural heritage is relatively new and raises ethical questions about the appropriateness of such tactics. An analysis of the historical evolution of protest strategies and their effectiveness could provide insight into whether the ends justify the means. Furthermore, exploring historical precedents of similar actions and their outcomes can inform contemporary debates on the moral implications of vandalism in the name of climate activism. These 4 points serve as a foundation for an in-depth analysis of the complex dynamics between climate activism, cultural heritage, and public perception, ultimately contributing to a broader understanding of the ethical and practical implications of using vandalism as a protest tactic. Here are 3 famous historical cases that resemble the controversial actions taken by climate activists targeting cultural heritage sites. 1. The suffragette movement and vandalism of public property. During the early 20th century, the suffragette movement in the UK saw women advocating for their right to vote through various forms of protest. Some suffragettes, frustrated by the slow progress of their campaign, resorted to vandalism, including the defacement of public property and the destruction of artworks. Notably, in 1913, suffragette Mary Richardson slashed the famous painting The Rokeby Venus by Diego Velázquez at the National Gallery in London as a statement against the oppression of women. This act of vandalism was intended to draw attention to the suffrage movement and highlight the struggles women faced in society, similar to how some modern climate activists believe that drastic measures are necessary to raise awareness about the climate crisis. 2. The American Civil Rights Movement and the bombing of churches. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement in the United States faced violent backlash against its demands for equality and justice. One of the most infamous incidents was the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, which resulted in the deaths of 4 young African American girls. While the bombing was a hate crime perpetrated by segregationists, it led to a national outcry and galvanized public support for the civil rights movement. This tragic event underscores how acts of violence, whether directed at cultural symbols or against individuals, can provoke significant social discourse and mobilize movements akin to how climate activists target heritage sites to provoke a response to climate change. 3. The iconoclast controversies during the Reformation. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century saw widespread iconoclasm, where reformers sought to destroy religious icons, statues, and artworks that they believed were idolatrous. In cities like Zurich, Geneva, and Wittenberg, Protestants dismantled altars, painted over frescoes, and destroyed statues in churches. This movement was fueled by a desire to purify the church and redirect focus towards a more personal relationship with faith. Similar to the rationale of some climate activists, the reformers viewed their actions as necessary to reclaim cultural and spiritual integrity, sacrificing established heritage in the name of a larger ideological goal. This historical precedent illustrates the complex interplay between activism and cultural destruction, echoing current debates surrounding climate activism. These cases demonstrate how activism, particularly when met with resistance or perceived inaction, can lead to controversial actions that target cultural heritage in an attempt to provoke public discourse and elicit change. Future outlook: predictions for the future of climate activism and cultural heritage. As the world grapples with climate change, the intersection of cultural heritage and climate activism is likely to evolve in several significant ways over the coming years. The actions of climate activists targeting cultural sites raise profound questions about ethics, urgency, and the effectiveness of protest strategies. Here are some predictions for the future of this complex landscape. 1. Increased polarization of public opinion. As climate change becomes more severe and its impacts more visible, public opinion on the tactics of climate activists is expected to polarize further. Supporters of aggressive tactics may argue that the urgency of the climate crisis justifies extreme actions, while critics will likely view these actions as harmful to the broader movement. This polarization could lead to intensified debates about the legitimacy of climate activism and the role of cultural heritage in these discussions. 2. Shift towards inclusive activism. In response to backlash against vandalism, many activists may pivot towards more inclusive forms of protest that engage communities and stakeholders in dialogue rather than confrontation. This could involve collaborative projects that highlight both environmental issues and the importance of preserving cultural heritage, fostering a sense of shared responsibility rather than division. 3. Institutional responses and policy changes. Governments and institutions may implement stronger protections for cultural heritage sites in light of the activism surrounding them. This could include increased funding for conservation efforts and the establishment of policies that address the impacts of climate change on cultural heritage. Furthermore, institutions may also develop more proactive engagement strategies with activists to foster constructive dialogue. 4. Emergence of new forms of art and expression. As activists seek to communicate the urgency of climate action, we may see a rise in artistic expressions that blend environmental themes with cultural heritage. This could include installations, performances, and digital art that provoke thought while preserving respect for cultural artifacts. These new forms of expression could serve as powerful tools for raising awareness without resorting to vandalism. 5. Legal and ethical frameworks. The actions of climate activists may prompt legal and ethical discussions around the protection of cultural heritage in the context of climate change. As vandalism raises questions about the balance between activism and respect for history, we may see the development of new legal frameworks that address these issues, potentially leading to clearer guidelines for both activists and cultural institutions. 6. Global solidarity movements. The climate crisis is a global issue, and as such, activism may increasingly transcend national boundaries. We could witness the emergence of global coalitions of activists who focus on both climate action and cultural preservation, sharing strategies and successes while respecting each other's cultural contexts. This solidarity could strengthen the overall effectiveness of climate activism. 7. Technological integration. Technology will continue to play a vital role in climate activism. Innovations such as augmented reality AR and virtual reality VR could be used to create immersive experiences that educate the public about the impacts of climate change on cultural heritage. Activists might leverage social media and digital platforms to amplify their messages, document their actions, and engage a wider audience in conversations about climate urgency and cultural preservation. 8. Interdisciplinary collaboration. As the complexities of climate change intersect with cultural heritage, there will likely be an increase in interdisciplinary collaborations among scientists, artists, historians, and activists. This collaborative approach can lead to innovative solutions that address environmental challenges while respecting and preserving cultural narratives. 9. Resilience of cultural heritage. Over time, the narrative surrounding cultural heritage may shift from one of preservation to one of resilience. As communities adapt to climate change, there will be a greater emphasis on how cultural heritage can inform and support sustainable practices. This perspective may help bridge the gap between environmental activism and cultural conservation. 10. Legacy of activism. The actions of current climate activists, whether perceived as radical or justified, will shape the legacy of the climate movement. Future generations may look back at these tactics as pivotal moments that sparked deeper engagement with climate issues. This legacy will influence how cultural heritage is valued in the context of environmental stewardship. In conclusion, the future of climate activism and its relationship with cultural heritage is poised for significant change. As the urgency of the climate crisis intensifies, activists will be challenged to find effective methods of protest that respect cultural heritage while advocating for necessary action. The evolution of this dynamic will reflect broader societal changes shaping the discourse around climate change, cultural preservation, and collective responsibility.